Now I request Steve Melendez to join us and share the story of the genocide of Native Americans. Thank you, Steve.
My name is Steve Melendez. I'm the president of the American Indian Genocide Museum. I'm a Paiute from Nevada. And first of all, I'd like to thank Marianne Thompson-Frank and Bill Krause, and of course Unity Church for allowing us to be here and to tell our side of the story, try to set history straight. My tribe has called the Great Basin of Nevada a home for thousands of years. And one of the first accounts of encounters between the whites and Indians out in Nevada was by a trapper. His name was Joe Meek. And Joe Meek was kind of a famous trapper because he was one of the men who discovered Yellowstone Park. And when he came out to Nevada with a party of trappers, the first thing he did was he saw a Shoshone Indian. So Joe Meek shot this Shoshone Indian, and one of the other trappers said, "Well, why did you do that?" And Joe Meek says, "Well," he said, "it was only a hint to keep the Indians from stealing our traps." And Wyeth asked him, "Well, had he stolen any?" And Joe Meek said, "No, but he looked like he was going to." He looked like he was going to. When I first read that, I figured that was an anomaly. Because people don't just kill other people because they look like they're going to steal something. I mean, we have people today that we call them sociopaths. They don't have a conscience. So I figured, well, you know, that's the exception to the rule. You know, sociopaths, you don't find many of those people who do not have a conscience. So, you know, you kind of don't believe, you know, that's the rule of the day, that people just shoot other people for no reason. I mean, because he looked like he was going to steal something. Now, Sarah Winnemucca also recorded another strange incident out in Nevada, my home state. She was she was the daughter of Chief Winnemucca. She was born in 1844, and she lived until 1891. And she was educated by a white family, so she could read and she can write. And she became an advocate for Indian rights, for Paiute conditions out in Nevada. And she wrote about how the cavalry dealt with the Indians when they first came to Nevada. And you know, in Hollywood, you see the movies about how John Wayne, who we saw, you know, you think John Wayne, you know, he's just you know, a good person, you know, upright person, you know, someone who does right all the time, you know. You think of the cavalry as like that, you know. So Sarah Winnemucca recorded what the cavalry did to our Paiute people out in Nevada. And I thought this was kind of strange too, like Joe Meek shooting the Indian just because he looked like he was going to steal something. She said, the soldiers rode up to their encampment and fired into it and killed almost all the people that were there. Oh, the fearful thing to tell. But it must be told. Yes, it must be told by me. It was all old men, women, and children that were killed. For my father had all the young men with him at the sink of the Carson on a hunting excursion, or they would have been killed too. After the soldiers had killed all but some of the little children and babies still tied up in their baskets, the soldiers took them also and set the camp on fire and threw them into the flames to see them burn alive. I had my baby brother killed there. My sister jumped on my father's best horse and ran away. As she ran, the soldiers ran after her. But thanks be to the good Father in the spirit land, she got away. This almost killed my poor papa. Yet my people kept peaceful. What Sarah Winnemucca did not know at the time was that this type of thing was happening all across the country. You have heard of the Cherokee Trail of Tears and the Indian Removal Act of 1830, how some groups were made to leave their homelands in the middle of winter. Our tribe endured almost the same thing. Now, Sarah Winnemucca, she also wrote about that because the Paiutes had their own Trail of Tears. She wrote, we went down, and Major Cochran met us at the door and said, Sarah, I am heartily sorry for you, but we cannot help it. We are ordered to take your people to Yakima Reservation. It was just a little before Christmas. My people were only given a week to get ready. I said, what? In this cold winter? In all this snow? And my people have so many little children? Why, they will all die. Oh, what can the president be thinking? Oh, tell me, is he a man or a beast? Yes, he must be a beast. If he has no feelings for my people, surely he ought to have some for the soldiers. I have never seen a president in my life, and I want to know whether he is made of wood or rock. For I cannot for once think that he can be a human being. No human being would do such a thing as that, send people across the fearful mountains in midwinter. I could not think of anything that could be so inhumane as to do such a thing. Send people across the mountains with snow so deep. She said, we traveled all day. It snowed all day long. We camped, and that night, a woman became a mother. And during the night, the baby died and was put under the snow. The next morning, the mother was put into the wagon. She was almost dead. We went into camp. That night, she was gone. That night, she too was gone and left beside the roadside, her poor body not even covered by the snow. In 5 days, 3 more children were frozen to death, and another woman became a mother. Her child lived 3 days, but the mother lived. They had a kind of shed made for us. You know the kind of shed you make for your stock in the wintertime. It was that kind. Oh, how we did suffer with cold. There was no wood, and the snow was waist deep, and many died off, just as cattle and horses do after traveling so long in the cold. This was from Sarah Winnemucca's book, Life Among the Paiutes. So the Paiutes had their own Trail of Tears too, how the Cherokees were made to, some of the groups were made to travel in the wintertime. It was almost as though the government wanted the elements to kill off the Indians. Today we read about Sarah Winnemucca's autobiography, and it may be hard to believe until we understand the mechanics of genocide. For years I had gathered seemingly unrelated atrocities against the Indians that just didn't seem to make sense. Then there came an epiphany moment that tied them all together. In a documentary about the genocide in Rwanda, there was heard a radio broadcast of a man calling for the extermination of the Tutsis. It was then that I realized that when the conditions were right, all it took for genocide to take place was for an influential leader to stand up and call on the people to eliminate the problem, and the problem being this group over here or that group over there. Ben Franklin was an influential leader of his time, and he wrote in 17 1798, if it be the design of Providence to extirpate these savages in order to make room for the cultivators of the earth, it seems not improbable that rum may be the appointed means. It has already annihilated all the tribes who formerly inhabited the East Coast. In 1859, Horace Greeley, another editor, wrote, "A weak sentimentalism may be horrified at the slaughter of the Indians as you would slaughter wolves, but the strong-hearted, clear-headed philanthropist will say that a general slaughter for the clearly expressed purpose of getting the friendless red men out of the way is preferable to the system of slow-hearted breakage and long-drawn torments now practiced. It is a settled fact that every wild Indian in the state must die. And the question is whether it were better that he be shot at once or tortured through half a dozen years by rum, disease, bereavement of all his relatives and friends, and then finally shot because he has committed some outrage. If I were an Indian, I should prefer to be shot at once. I should enter a strong protest against this violation of my natural right." That was Horace Greeley who wrote that. Influential people can target racial groups of people. An editorial in 1853, California newspaper, the Eureka Herald, proclaimed, "We hope that the government will render such aid as will aid the citizens of the North to carry on a war of extermination until the last redskin of these tribes has been killed. Extermination is no longer the question of time. The time has come, the work has commenced, and let the first man who says treaty or peace be regarded as a traitor." An editorial by L. Frank Baum, the author of The Wizard of Oz, appeared in the Saturday Pioneer, January 3rd, 1891. And he wrote, "The Pioneer has before declared that our only safety depends upon the total extermination of the Indians. Having wronged them for centuries, we had better, in order to protect our civilization, follow it up one more time with one more wrong and wipe out these untamed and untamable creatures from the face of the earth. In this lies the future safety of our settlers." These newspaper articles are just carrying on a long-standing tradition, such as the proclamation of Governor William Shirley of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1755. In his proclamation, which you can find out in the foyer, it read, his proclamation called for, offered cash bounties for every male Indian scalp brought in as evidence of their being killed, 40 pounds. Also, for every scalp of such female Indian or male Indian under 12 years of age brought as evidence of their being killed, 20 pounds. And that was one of the original 13 colonies. And there have been historians who have said that all of the 13 colonies had scalp bounties on the heads of Indian men, women, and children. You know, Theodore Roosevelt kind of summed up the mentality of the time. And he was president, I think, around 1900. But Theodore Roosevelt wrote this book called The Winning of the West and the Indian Wars. And this is what Teddy Roosevelt said. Teddy Roosevelt is revered, and he was one of the presidents who felt this sentiment against the Indians. And in the other room, you can read about what Thomas Jefferson said and how he felt about the Indians, or George Washington, or U.S. Grant. But it's kind of like what Teddy Roosevelt said. And what Teddy Roosevelt wrote, he said, the most ultimately righteous of all wars is a war with savages. He says, though it is apt to be also the most terrible and inhumane, the rude, fierce settler who drives the savage from the land, lays all civilized mankind under a debt to him. American and Indian, Boer and Zulu, Cossack and Tartar, New Zealander and Maori, in each case, the victor, horrible though many of his deeds are, has laid deep the foundations for the future greatness of a mighty people. The consequences of struggles for territories between civilized nations seem small by comparison. Looked at from the standpoint of the ages, it is of little moment whether Lorraine is part of Germany or France, whether the northern Adriatic cities pay homage to the Australian Kaiser or Italian king. But it is of incalculable importance that America, Australia, and Siberia should pass out of the hands of their red, black, and yellow Aboriginal owners and become the heritage of the dominant world races. Teddy Roosevelt. You know, Adolf Hitler, we saw excerpts of the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust. Now, Adolf Hitler wrote from his table talks. Adolf Hitler thought he was such a great person that he was like Richard Nixon, who recorded all of his conversations in the White House. Now, Hitler had an officer off to the side of the room during his after-dinner conversations with his hierarchy, and they took down his conversations in shorthand. And this is what he wrote. This from Hitler's table talk. He says, "As for the natives, we will have to screen them carefully. The Jew, that destroyer, we shall drive out. There is only one duty, to Germanize this country with the immigration of Germans and to look upon the natives as redskins. If these people are defeated, heaven have mercy. But we don't hate them. That sentiment is unknown to us. We are guided only by reason. They, on the other hand, have an inferiority complex. They have a real hatred towards the conquerors whose crushing superiority they can feel. The intelligentsia, we have too many of them at home. All those who have the feeling for Europe can join in our work. In this business, I shall go straight ahead, cold-bloodedly. What they may think about me at this juncture is to me a matter of complete indifference. I don't see why a German who eats a piece of bread should torment himself with the idea that the soil that produced this bread has been won by the sword. When we eat wheat from Canada, we don't think about the despoiled Indians. The precept that it's men's duty to love one another is theory, and the Christians are the last to practice it." Hitler also said, "I am standing guard against the Jew. I am defending the handiwork of the Lord." Adolf Hitler. Now, in conclusion, I want to bring all this home to, we've talked about Nevada and we talked about Massachusetts Bay, but I want to bring it home to Texas. Now, Texas, in 1823, Stephen F. Austin brought 300 families to the Gulf Coast, near Matagorda Bay in Houston, around that area. And he writes of his first encounter with the Indians, and he wrote of, in his journals, he said that they parted apparently good friends. But then he says, these Indians and the Karankawas may be called the universal enemies of man. The approach of an American population will be the signal of their extermination, for there will be no way of subduing them but for extermination. 5 years later, in 1828, Mexican General Terán wrote of the Karankawas. He says that since the North Americans understand war with the savages better than do our Mexicans, they dealt the Indians swift punishment, striking back 10 times for every blow that they received. He said if an Indian killed a settler, a large party of settlers would set out to hunt down and to kill 10 of the tribe of any age or sex. He says by such behavior they have reduced the tribe of the Karankawas such that no one speaks of it today because it seems to have been exterminated. Historian W.W. Newcomb sheds more light on the fate of the Karankawas. He said the colonists defeated the Indians completely. They were driven to Matagorda Bay, some even into the bay where they drowned. About half the Cocos and the Coroncos were killed. 4 years later, in 1832, about the time that Joe Meek was shooting the Shoshone Indian out in Nevada, this visitor to the Austin colony wrote, "Shooting down red men wherever they were found was the order of the day." John Joel Glanton, a settler of Stephen F. Austin's colony, was said to be the owner of a mule load of Indian scalps. These bounty hunters were making a profit on Indian body parts to the tune of $200 for the scalp of an Indian adult male and $100 for the scalps of women and children with the ears on. When Maribel Lamar declared an extermination war against the Indians in his 1838 inaugural address, extermination in Texas had been ongoing for 15 years. Now, you may say, well, why is it important that we remember our history? Well, we have to realize that genocide takes place when racism and prejudice and bigotry and injustice and intolerance are allowed to grow. Then all it takes is a leader, such as Hitler or such as anyone, to step up and said, you know what we need now, just like in Rwanda, the guy on the radio who was calling for the extermination of the Tutus, that people will do the bidding of the leader, and it happens over and over again in history. So why is it important for us to speak out and remember the genocide of the American Indians? Because we have a National Football League team in our nation's capital called the Washington Redskins, and I don't think there's anything more dehumanizing than to allow a race of people to be used as a mascot which is a dictionary-defined racial slur, because for the simple reason that you have no control over what the opposing team fans bring to the stadium, and that makes us, the Indian people, targets for racial slurs and all kinds of signage and insensitive comments. But that is why we do what we do, because we are not going to let genocide happen again. Thank you.